speaker tonight, before we switch and we'll start to take some questions, is Rob Warland. And Rob is on the staff here at Hope Community Church, and he is going to share a little bit of story as well as some biblical perspective of how we approach this as well. So join me in welcoming here to the Transform Idea stage, Rob Warland.
I got to start by thanking the previous three speakers, and man, that was powerful from the different perspectives. So thank you to Transform for setting this up. Thank you to the speakers for sharing, and thanks to all of you for being here tonight. I really appreciate it. I'm thankful to see that there are so many people that do care about this, and I assume it's because either you are impacted by mental illness or you know someone, whether a family member, a friend, something like that is impacted, and you want to do something about it. So thank you to everybody that's here tonight. I want to start by having you consider a definition of love. What is love to you? Not what do you love or who do you love, but what is love to you? So think about some words there that come to mind. Maybe you think like a strong affection, maybe intense emotion or adoration. Now consider, what is a biblical definition of love? We see that for God so loved the world that he gave his only son. We see that this is how you'll be known, that you will show love, that you will lay down your life for others. What is love to you? Now I want you to consider this. What is the opposite of love? Some of you might say that it's fear. Others may say it's animosity or possibly a dislike towards something. And others may say that hate is the opposite of love. And I'm here tonight to say that I believe that apathy is the opposite of love. It's not just indifference. Indifference is a response with a lack of emotion to something, but apathy in its root is a lacking of emotion. It's non-existent emotion or feeling of things. So tonight I'm going to share a couple personal mental health stories and about the tension of love and apathy in them. And my hope is that they will inform and encourage you in light of God's story for me. So the first personal story is about my dad. When I was 2 years old, my parents got a divorce. My dad was an alcoholic, and it was dangerous to live with him. So my mom left with me and my sister. And as soon as that happened, something switched in him, and he quit drinking. And he became good friends with my mom. I knew him, but I knew him from a distance. He lived a few towns over. Didn't spend a lot of time with him. And just being a kid, you don't really know someone really well. And I didn't know at the time about the continued personal struggles that he went through. But I do remember very clearly on June 14th, 2002, I got a phone call from my mom. She said, "Your dad has passed away." I remember it, like it just happened. And she continued to share what happened. She shared how he had continued to struggle with depression, how he had financial issues, relational issues. And this led to him losing his job that he had worked at for almost 20 years. And on the same day, his second wife had divorced him. And so it was just too much for him. I would, excuse me. After that, for me, I entered into this time of just uncertainty. I mean, immediately, I didn't know what to do. I heard the words, but it didn't compute. It just didn't make sense to me. But it was so difficult that I just fell to my knees and I didn't have words. And I know some of you in this room have experienced things like that. And it's very difficult to deal with. After that uncertainty and that fog remained there. And I had loving family. I had friends who came from out of state to stay with me and just give me that gift of presence. I also had church support. I wasn't a Christian at the time, but my dad had sought help from from doctors and therapists and a pastor locally. And so the church cared for me, even though I wasn't a member, even though I wasn't a Christian, they still cared. Unfortunately, I chose to suppress it and move on. I chose not to deal with it. And in reflecting on that time, I believe God was screaming to me, I'm right here. My arms are open for you. Come to me. Instead, I followed my own thoughts wherever they took me. This led to isolation. This led to broken relationships. This led to drinking and to drugs. And eventually, an attempted suicide. I decided that it would just be better to not have to deal with things. And so wrote a note to my mom. I grabbed all the pills that I could find in my house, and I went into my garage and I started my truck. The door was locked, and I just sat there, just thinking through it all. And then someone knocked on the door. And out of shame and embarrassment, I shut off my vehicle and just sat there, hoping that they wouldn't try to break in or at least knock again. And there wasn't another knock. But for some reason, that changed me. That for me was enough to go, I don't want to do this. I went back inside and ended up going to the hospital to deal with what I had done there. But for some reason, I didn't take my life at that time. And I'm thankful to God for whoever that was that knocked on that door. I have no idea who it was. So during this time, though, I had no anchor. I had no compass, no direction. I was using people for selfish gain. As I mentioned, I was drinking and into drugs. I lived in the moment. I wanted to have fun. I just didn't care about other things. Everything was about me. And in 2004, God was gracious enough to save me in the depths of my folly and to show me something worthy to fix my eyes upon. Over the next few years, I found out about Hope Community Church, started attending here, got plugged in, met my wife here. We have 3 beautiful children. And you could look at my life and go, oh, it's a good life. Well, and then in 2014, I was riding on a moped that a friend lent to me over by Theodore Worth, and a car got a little close to me, and I moved over, and there was a median, and I clipped it, and I went over the handlebars, and I hit my head. And I had a bruise and some scrapes and whatnot, but I felt okay. But the next morning, I had a hard time finding words. I had a pretty bad headache. I knew something just wasn't quite right. And so I decided to go over to HCMC and have them check me out. And all in all, they basically said, yeah, you have a concussion. If things get worse, if they become more intense, come back, see a doctor. We'll help you out. But right now, take it easy, be cautious. At that point, over the next few months there, things just kind of began to fade. The meaningfulness of my life was just kind of slipped away. Things felt pointless. And all in all, I just didn't want any responsibilities. I didn't want to have to do anything. And here I was working at the church. I am married, was at the time. I have these kids, these young kids, this family, friends, and I just didn't want anything to do with it. So I went and saw a doctor, and they prescribed some antidepressants for me. I saw a therapist who helped me work through naming and describing emotions, and I went and saw a neurologist, scanned my brain, and saw no bleeding or swelling. And so on one hand, that's really good information. On the other hand, it didn't help at all because it didn't have answers for me. Got to a point where I didn't want to get out of bed. I didn't want to do much for work. I didn't want to hang out with friends. I didn't want to interact with my kids, my wife. And again, I spent a lot of time in my own thoughts. Going back to how I didn't want any responsibilities, I felt like really the only thing I could do, the 2 best options that I had in front of me were either abandonment, just leaving everything that I had, or suicide. Now, during this time, I still believed in God. I didn't doubt his goodness or his sovereignty. I knew the word of God. I just didn't care. Now, these 2 stories are very similar for certain reasons, but they're also very different as well. And I'd say the important difference was my worldview. I think your worldview matters greatly. And to me, worldview is like a pair of glasses. If I take this off, I can't see any of you. My vision is that bad. I see some blurs out there. And I think this is what our world does. I think we go through life kind of seeing things, trying to squint, but what we need to do is we need to put on our glasses. We need to put in a pair of contacts. You need to get LASIK. Whatever it is, right? I want LASIK. That would be great. But the worldview matters, and the biblical worldview is that God created a beautiful world. God created you and me, which he said is very good. That includes your body, your brain, your personality, your emotions. But sin entered into the world and broke and twisted and distorted everything. And I believe that's why we have mental illness, because sin entered the world then. And I agree with the previous speakers that it's not necessarily because you sinned that you have a mental illness. I think it's because of the broken world that we're in. So what does it matter? What does it matter? Ultimately, it comes down to, in Job 38, one of the versions, after Job has many things taken away from him, goes through all this pain, his friends try helping him. In chapter 38, God says, "Who is this that darkens counsel with words without wisdom?" And in one version it says, "Gird your loins." Another says, "Brace yourself like a man." And he says, I will ask you questions and you will answer me. And then he goes on to say, "Look at who I am and look at what I've done." And I think this is a beautiful thing because it helps us to see who God is. It's easy with mental illness to get distracted by your emotions and feelings. And those aren't bad things, but they are broken. And we need to go back to see God for who he is and what he's done for us. So there are three things that have helped me throughout all this. One is dependence. What am I tethered to? I mentioned I didn't have an anchor before. And I think we need to be tethered to the Word of God. We need to be tethered to him through prayer and also through community. Community is the second thing. I was really good at hiding my stuff and not wanting to share, but now I've recognized when that's the case, when I hear that voice say, "You don't need to share." But there's great value in vulnerability, especially when you're struggling with mental illness. The last thing is time. And time is one of the most difficult things when you're struggling with mental illness because things seem to take forever and you just want to be done with it. And we need to consider our expectations of God amidst time. We need to realize that God isn't going to work necessarily in our time frame. But that doesn't mean that the promises of God are not true. They're still true, no matter how you feel about them or what you think about them. I want to read real quick Acts 17 here because I think this will help us understand who God is. It says, "The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gave to all mankind life and breath and everything. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on the face of the earth, having determined their allotted periods and boundaries of their dwelling place." And here's the thing, that they should seek God. God has you where you're at for this reason, so that you would seek God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. Yet he is not actually far from each one of us. So whatever you're struggling through, whatever the mental illness is, whatever, if you have a friend, a family member, know that God is there. Whatever the situation, God is not far away, even though it may feel like it. Thank you.